Good evening. My name is Mike Haney, and welcome to another episode of 60 Minutes in Black America. We've got an exciting episode for you this week as we talk about the state of America, the state of Black America specifically. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. My name is Mike Haney, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Hopefully, you're watching us on Facebook, one of our Facebook pages, or our YouTube page, or our LinkedIn page. Make sure that you like or subscribe, or at least let us know that you're out there watching. And I got to tell you how grateful I am for all of you. Last week, we set a record for this year's show. We had upwards of 1,000 people across all of our networks watch last week's show with Dr. Zolikoff, who I'd like to thank for appearing last week as we talked about the importance of healthcare and the state of healthcare in Black America and the correlation between the previous week's show that we were in Selma and broadcast, and how here in our country, in Black America, there is a correlation between healthcare and poverty. As you'll see, the correlation today between Selma, healthcare, and poverty as we talk about the state of America, specifically the state of Black America. But before I go any further, let me give a big get well to our executive producer, Leon Thomas, who was hospitalized this week for a very serious illness. He is home, I'm happy to say, and doing much better. But Leon, we miss you. We thank you and are grateful for everything that you do for us. And just take care of yourself. Oren and Jay have things covered today. And so get well, Leon. I also would be remiss if I don't mention Lance Reddick. Lance Reddick of The Wire. He was that tall, handsome guy in The Wire that played the very professional lieutenant. And he also starred in John Wick. And for a consummate hotelier like myself, to watch Lance play the consummate hotelier who took care of everything that was necessary by John Wick, from an automobile to getting rid of bodies, but remained the professional that he was, because it was really none of his business what John Wick did, but yet it was all his business. You know, our condolences to Lance's family, who died this week at the age of 60 of natural causes. So, job well done, Lance. We'll miss you. We'll miss you. And I can't wait to see reruns just to remind me how consummate a professional you were. Also, today, W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois was born today in 1868. Happy birthday to W.E.B. Du Bois. And whether you knew it or not, William Edward Bogart Du Bois, that's what W.E.B. stands for, came known to the world as W.E.B. Du Bois, was born in Barrington, Massachusetts, up in the Northwest near Boston, Massachusetts, where he lived until heading off to attend Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. Du Bois' experience in college opened his eyes to the severity of racial discrimination in the South. After graduating from Fisk, he returned north to attend Harvard University, where he earned a doctoral and became the first American to do so. So, very historic day today. W.E.B. Du Bois was born today, and I am honored to follow him, as I was born yesterday. And not that I'm comparing myself to W.E.B. Du Bois, but it's great to be in the week or 24 hours of the presence of someone who was so instrumental in our country. W.E.B. Du Bois, happy birthday. I also would like to highlight a couple of things that have happened this week in our country and HBCUs. There's a report that came out in HBCUs, and we heard that W.E.B. Du Bois got his start at Fisk University. And HBCUs are having record number of enrollments, which is so good to hear. Record number of enrollments with HBCUs, and that they have a great problem of getting dormitory space for the thousands of Blacks and others that are enrolling in HBCUs. HBCUs initially started out with 138 HBCUs, which were, and for those of you that may not know, historically Black colleges and universities, which were which came about as a result of the discrimination or lack of ability of Blacks to attend regular universities back in the late 1800s. We now have about 110 HBCUs across the country, but it is just so refreshing to hear the news about HBCUs and the renaissance and the resurrection of education in our community, and the number of people, the record number of people that are desiring to attend HBCUs. And off of our conversation last week regarding the state of healthcare, I don't know if you had an opportunity to read about Rite Aid. Rite Aid, the large neighborhood drugstore that you may shop or you may get your pharmaceuticals, is under federal indictment because of the role that they play in the dealing of opiates. And as Dr. Zollicoffer said last week, you know, the pharmaceuticals, which we said did over $600 billion in pharmaceutical deals in the year 2022, continue to highlight the issues that we have in our communities. You know, so here's Rite Aid, a major pharmaceutical that the Department of Justice has said has played a major role in the distribution of illegal opiates. Man, I tell you. But yet, when we look at the distribution of marijuana or cannabis in our neighborhoods by our young Black kids, mainly in the 90s and the 2000 century, and the thousands of them that were incarcerated and got criminal records and could no longer get a job or a great job as a result of. Now here we come with the legalization of cannabis, and essentially, as you hear later on as we talk with our guests, that you know, Blacks are locked out of, you know. So, and also I had a chance this week to watch the Chris Rock Selective Outrage show, and I purposely had avoided it for whatever reasons. And so I said, let me take a look at this show. Chris Rock, and we know that our comedians tend to be very political in their material. And put Chris Rock, and the show was actually aired on Netflix live from Baltimore, Maryland, my hometown. So it was good to see Chris return to Baltimore and air his Netflix special, which everyone was anticipating because they expected him to make some comments relative to the issues he had with Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, in which we weren't disappointed. But, you know, I was surprised, first of all, at who was in the audience. You had judges, you had lawyers, you had doctors. The elite of the elite in our community were in the audience watching Chris Rock. And not that you can't watch Chris Rock, but some of the selective material, you know, it just gave me pause to look at it from a different perspective of who was in the audience and what he was saying. You know, he talked about Meghan Markle, the young lady that married Harry, from the royal family, and how going on Oprah, she expressed outrage at how she was treated by the royal family, and Chris's joke, so to say. And we did a show back in November on the colonization of Africa, and how the royal family at the time of Elizabeth's death was highlighted. But it's something that we should celebrate, or something that we should look at very remorsefully in terms of her contribution to world and society based on the racism and colonization of many Africans, and the theft and robbery of riches and throughout the continent of Africa. And Chris alluded to this. He alluded to, hey, Megan's on Oprah crying, etc. And what does she expect out of the most racist family in this country, in this world? Who invented racism. And so I say that to say, as we look and we understand history and we become educated, before we celebrate everything and everyone. Not that we aren't saddened as we are with Lance Riddick, someone's death, but celebrating but not understanding where they come from is two different things. And that's why it's always important to read. And shows like 60 Minutes in Black America, watch for that educational value so that we understand what some of the common concerns, goals should be in our community. And then Chris went on to talk about beyond that, abortion. And you got a sense of his feeling on abortion. And we know that in this country, America, although we represent only 13% of the population of this country, we represent over 50% of the abortion in number, not as a percentage of our population, as a people, as blacks, represent over 50% of the abortions. And he described it as, yeah, women should have the right to kill babies. And he says, make no mistake, that's what you're doing, killing babies. Now, I don't necessarily embrace his description, but as you recall, I mentioned who's in the audience and the nervous laughter, but laughter of the people as he expressed his opinions politically was astounding to me. And one final thing that really was astounding to me, I went back and watched Chris Rock again 2 times for the sole purpose of counting how many times he said the word nigger, right? Nigger, right? Not N-word, but nigger. 32 times he mentioned this in description and action. One time he mentioned it 10 times in a row. Now, we know that the proper word, or let me put it this way, that the proper word to describe nigger is to say the N-word, right? I don't believe in it because I believe that it continues to institutionalize racism when we don't address it as it is, right? So I mentioned to you doctors, lawyers, mayors, governors, other entertainers of high esteem sitting in the audience who may on Thursday describe their outrage of the use of this word by saying N-word, but sat through a dialogue of Chris Rock mentioning this 32 times and not one person got up and walked out that I noticed. Matter of fact, the laughter, the shattering of the dentures' laughter, and maybe shattering of their blackness, really, and their contradiction. And maybe this is what he meant by selective outrage. We get outraged when we hear something of this nature. In corporate America, we dialogue with corporate America with this word by using N, but the connotation of the word nigger as described and as Chris Rock used it wasn't enough for us as a people to say, you know what, if we felt that way, that this word is so outrageous that we're going to get up and walk out of his show. Please, people, and the institutionalization of racism continues as a result of us not being honest in the contradictions that we show, particularly in our leadership. When you look at those that attended in the audience, all of a sudden on Friday, an acceptance of that word as a joke. And on Monday, back in corporate America, acknowledging the institutionalization and the way that we're treated, but using the N-word to describe it, to let people off the hook for what they intend to do anyway, but not necessarily hearing a word that doesn't offend me, but offends them. Because it's not a word that I need, it's not a word that I use, but a word that now we describe freely and are able to use as the N-word. And I challenge you to go to Webster and find a word that says N and describes it in correlation to what the word that's described and defined in Webster that says nigger is. And it begins to highlight some of the issues as a community we have when we have selective outrage and contradictory behavior of our leadership, which we'll hopefully talk about today. And so today we're going to talk about the state of America. And we've got in the studio today, we've got Deatrice Muckle out of Florida. We've got attorney Bob Dashiell out of Baltimore, our irrepressible Beverly Cooper Wiele out of Boston, Massachusetts, highly popular, trying to get her to do her own show instead of appearing on here for 10, 15-minute segments, talking about the state of America from their perspective, economically, particularly politically, as we are in the year before the primary, the presidential primary. In many cities across America, the mayoral, city council primaries on the local levels that determine how we live and how we eat as a people. So I would like to bring them all in at this time. Beverly, how are you?
How are you?
Good. And I've got a little bit of feedback, but we're going to work through that. It's so good to have you and Bob back. You know, you guys are beginning to look like a team when it comes to this show, and I'm grateful for you. Bob, how's everything? Fantastic.
Hi, Bev. How are you?
Good to see you again, Bob.
Nice seeing you as well.
Hey, before we get started, I want to play this clip for us to kind of set the tone by someone that I have heard, doesn't understand, but moreover, this clip kind of in the context of the companies and does it describe where we are as a society of blacks in this country. Can we play that first clip, please? You want us to come back? Okay. You want us to come back to it? We'll come back to that clip. We'll let you guys figure it out on that clip. We'll come.
Unions, hosted by TV and radio host Tavis Smiley.
Hey, we'll come back to that clip. Hey, first of all, just want to get you guys' opinion. People know you on this show, Beverly and Bob. They know you. They know who you are. So let's go right at the issue, man. When you talk about the state of Black America, right, and you talk about economically, crime and justice, educationally, what does that mean in the context of, you know, state of to you? And Bob, let's start with you.
I started the beginning, Mike. And the beginning is America owes black folk a debt that has not been repaid. And the Band-Aids and the ointments and the wraps, whatever that may have been extended from time to time, mostly on an individual basis, do not satisfy the obligation. And until the failure to pay that debt to black folk in this country and indeed around the world skews the picture that we see. So when people want to take a picture today and say this is and move from there, it's like trying to drink half the water from the bottom part of the glass and leaving the top part filled. It doesn't work. There's a debt that needs to be paid, and we need to talk about that, and we need to resolve how it's going to be handled. And until then, there won't be peace either in this country, in my opinion, or anywhere else in the world.
How about you, Dad?
Wow, Bob, that was a really good analogy with the water from the bottom of the glass. I agree with what you said. I'm thinking about how we're doing economically, and as you know, there's a real big difference between wealth and wages, and we need to get on working more toward wealth. And even though wages are an important part of that, I'd like for us to be looking at our overall picture of wealth, how we attain it, how we handle it once we have it, and how we're going to speak to elected officials to make them part of our gaining that.
Wow, Beverly, I'm glad you started. You started the conversation. Let's talk about wealth. Let's talk about how we can achieve equity and fair pay, not job fair. Someone mentioned, forget job fairs. Let's talk about fair job with fair wages. So blacks are 14%, let's say, of the population of this country, but as it relates to businesses that have employer-related businesses that employ people, because normally we employ ourselves, just like in other cultures of America, be it Asian or white cultures, they normally employ themselves. Blacks comprise of 2.3% of the employer-related businesses in this country. And as a contrast, Asian Americans represent 6.6% of the population of this country, but yet they have a percentage of 10.6% of employer-related businesses. So is it a problem of equality, or is it a problem of the ability to access capital, or is it just plain old racism as to why blacks lag, having built this country, the ability to be self-employed or have businesses in this country? What do you say? What do you say, Bob?
There's only one way to develop wealth, and that's through land ownership. So let's separate wealth from income. With respect to income, which largely results from employment, a significant number of African American folks are employed by white companies. And so when you're trying to look at the percentage of African Americans that are employed generally, and you look at the percentage that's employed by black companies, you'll find that if you compare company to company, 100 employees versus 100 employees, what you see is correct. The majority of those employees employed by black companies are going to be black employees. But when you go when you go to companies where the number of employees exceeds 500, you not only lose black employment, but you lose black companies. And so, and obviously, the companies with the largest employment base are not owned by African Americans at all. And so, and that explains that, plus the fact that a number of African Americans are employed by those white companies, explains why the percentage is so low, comparatively speaking. And also, with respect to Asians, you might say that 95% of those employed over here who have jobs work for those companies. You're going to find a smaller percentage of them working for companies that are not Asian owned.
What's your thought?
Are you about to ask me what I want to say about that?
Yeah, you started off. You kicked it off.
I'm going to say that I agree with Bob to some degree, but when we were a subsistence economy, land was the basis of all wealth. We don't live in that way anymore. So now you can have an idea, and that will be the basis of your wealth. If you're Bill Gates, you don't have to own a farm or hire tenant farmers or workers. You have an idea, and that idea is what builds wealth. That's equally true if you're a person of color. You don't need a lot of land. You need an idea. You do need employees to carry it out. Now, I don't know what types of businesses people of color own versus what types of businesses Asians own. I'm going to say, if you're being stereotypical, you'd say, well, you see a lot of Asians employed in the restaurant business. That's true. Of course, they hire people who are like them because that's who cook what they cook. I'd also say that Asians may not have as much access to capital, but traditionally they're people who share. They tend to buy in. They tend to be a collective. They buy in together. They pool their money and start a business that way. As a people, certainly we are able to do that and can. We can do that sort of thing and hire ourselves for whatever type of business we choose. We just need to know what it is. We need to have an idea. We need to get training.
Let me give you a different perspective, right?
Oh.
So you heard what I mentioned in terms of Chris Rock's comments on Meghan Markle, right? Maybe the reason that we as a community, and I'll whenever our production team has that tape, because maybe part of the reason is what is explained in this tape about our community, is that maybe there's an expectation by us as a people. Maybe the problem's twofold. Second of all, we're still dealing with racism. Is the tape ready? Queued up? Let's play that tape.
Brother Minister, if you believe or if you agree with
Tavis Smiley.
somewhere along the way, what we surrendered was the moral authority. How did that happen? And how do we get it back? If you agree with that.
Thank you. First, let me say I'm honored to be here with this august panel and those that are sitting in the audience. And I'm honored to be in this blessed house built by my brother, Reverend Bishop Eddie Long. The thing that came to my mind when you used the word contract and my brother used the word covenant, a contract or a covenant is between parties who intend to make their word their bond. I think it is proper and right.
Okay, and so we didn't get to the crux of what he was saying. What he was saying is that we as a community of people have to better work together, have to come together, so that we're able to do things collectively. I was mentioning Meghan Markle and the fact that many times we go to these companies and we expect to be treated a certain way. It's their companies, right? It's their companies. And bring Bev and Bob back in so we all are part of this conversation and community. It's their company. And what right do we have to expect to be anything other than respected and paid fairly? Equality doesn't necessarily have to happen in a corporate environment, as Chris Rock was alluding to, with Meghan thinking that going and being part of the royal family who had a history of racism, that we should be the CEO or CAO or any of the other C's, which is why Asians, when they come to this country, develop their own. And Bev, to your point, they don't just have corner stores and restaurants, but they own high-tech companies, they own banks, and they own other things where 10% as 6% of the population, and we as 14% with 2% of the population, there's a collaborative spirit. See, we can't continue, in my estimation, to look outside of our strategies as we did with Black Wall Street before it was burnt down to figure it out. Bob mentioned earlier that many times we employ our own, just as other cultures employ their own cultures too. Is that right? Is that fair? I don't know if it's not unfair. If we choose to go work with them as someone of another culture, being respected, being treated fairly, or paid fairly is what it is that we should expect. We don't necessarily shouldn't expect to climb the corporate ladders unless they choose to, because that's just the way it is. But we could do something in our own communities to further the growth of businesses. And let's take cannabis. Let's look at the cannabis industry and what's happening with cannabis and the lack. We were part of the PPP program prior to cannabis and COVID. You know what that stood for then? The prison pipeline for profit, which our president, I believe Joe Biden, was part of, and he apologized for back in the 90s when they had these atrocious legalities and criminal laws that highlighted thousands of Black people in jail for small possession of marijuana. Bob, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, let me go. I'm going to get to that, but I want to go back to something that Bev said earlier about wealth and income. It's true. You don't have to have land to make money, but look where the money is used for once you get it. That's the expression of wealth. Bill Gates is buying a whole bunch of islands in Hawaii. That's an expression of wealth. It's not when we measure wealth, we're not talking about cash on hand in the bank accounts, which is probably formidable, but we're talking about the value of the assets that they've acquired with the money they've earned. That's wealth. And you don't have that without land. Now getting to cannabis and the development of it is paradoxical. It is ironical that a drug once that plagued our community from the point of view of incarceration is now going to be legalized, and we don't have there's no real mechanism for African Americans, black folk, to acquire ownership of either the processors, the growers, or the retailers of it. Well, the reason for that is to the greatest extent that our investment money in this country has come from the government. The government has been the source. The SBA, other government programs have provided the seed money for black business generally. Our money generally hasn't come from the private side. It hasn't come from, the mezzanine capitalists or the venture capitalists or the private banks. The problem, of course, with cannabis is the government has legalized it and they're issuing licenses for it, but they're not providing any funding. So the lack of government funding for the cannabis development is the real reason why you won't see and don't see and haven't seen black folk flourishing in that industry.
Interesting. Before we get to Bev, maybe the fact that they have legalized it, and it's amazing in the state of Maryland, they're about to legalize it if they haven't. We already passed it as a recreational drug, and I think our Senate and our House are about to legalize it with use, right? So all of a sudden we made money when we privatized prisons, locking up tens of thousands of blacks in the 90s, right? Locked up tens of thousands of blacks at a cost of $50,000 a head to ensure that these privatized correctional systems had the ability to make money. It's all about the money. That's why I said the initial PPP was the prison to pipeline for profit that they set up. So all of a sudden they found out that, hey, we can make money off of marijuana, legalize it recreational. We know who the user are, clamp them out, keep blacks out of it. When we had our young kids out there selling marijuana to support an economy, they locked them up. Now they've legalized it, and we can't see through what's happening. And Bob, you mentioned funding. Back in Black Wall Street, I don't think that blacks who have in the tourism industry alone over $200 billion spent a year, there's necessarily a need for government to fund the startup of our businesses. But us as a community, what is our strategies? Bev, what are your thoughts about this?
It has always disturbed me since marijuana became legal in a lot of places that those of us who used to go to prison are pretty much out of the loop when it comes to ownership. I will say, however, that where I'm from in Boston, there's a former black city councilor. His name is Tito Jackson. He was already in the pharmaceuticals business before he became a city councilor. But after he retired as a city councilor, he went into the retail marijuana business. He has, I don't know where his money came from, but perhaps you should have him on your show and he can tell you more. He has put together packaging where he has essentially gotten a luxurious marijuana industry where he's got a retail shop, he's got a restaurant, he's got entertainment. So he is somebody who has taken his knowledge of the trade, not the illegal drug trade, but the legitimate drug trade, and has made money off of it. So it is possible. I don't know how he put together the funding. Obviously, it wasn't the government because the federal government still does not recognize marijuana as a legal substance. So you're never going to get money from them that way. But this is someone who has managed to do that. If you don't mind my going back to Bob on the land issue, it used to be that you acquired land because you made your profit from it. You grew something. Bill Gates has a lot of land, but as far as I know, he's not growing anything on it. He's not using it to make more wealth. He is using it, to have a place of leisure, to have his friends over. Now, if he ever becomes close to bankruptcy, then he can sell it. But as far as we know, he's not growing pineapples or marijuana, if he could. He's not using it to make wealth in the traditional sense that land used to be used to make wealth.
Wow. Hey, well, let's stay on this marijuana subject for a while because it really bothers me. that only 2% of that industry in this country, in which 39 states, I believe, now have legalized some form of marijuana use, 2% of blacks, business wise, are involved. And yet, let's use the state of Maryland as an example. We passed this legislation with a significant number of black legislatures, which disappoint me highly, knowing how inequitable it was before it was even a ballot referendum. And what leverage do we have at this point? And so when you look at big pharmacy, big pharmaceutical drugs, because to me, any mood altering chemical is a drug. I consider marijuana a drug. I consider opiate a drug. We talked about earlier Rite Aid as a drug. We talked about the opiate crisis in which a doctor in Florida got multiple life sentences because he made almost $20 million handing out prescription. And Rite Aid, right, has just been accused by the Justice Department of doing similarly, right? And then here comes cannabis. Here comes cannabis. They locked us up for cannabis so they could make money with privatized corrections. Now they've legalized it so they can make money off of us, not off of just us, but everyone, you know, because it's just the right thing to do. But where do we leverage? Where do we leverage our political power as we begin to switch into politics and war, politics and politicians? Oh my, right? And what it is that they are supposed to do, to Bob's point, the government is supposed to fund? I don't think so. I think what the government is supposed to do is ensure that people get a fair shake. And this marijuana legislation and using Maryland as a state, as an example, that's about to pass without first ensuring that people are able, all people are able to do business. The data's there. There's only 2% of blacks that are doing business in marijuana, but almost 50% because of it. And our prison population were locked up 20 years as a result of it. Hey, you can comment to that if you want, but last word on cannabis. Bev, thoughts about that?
Question. Just in the past couple of weeks, I know that there was a bidding war between Tyler Perry and Byron Allen about who was going to buy BET. So here are two brothers, they're in a bidding war. And I think there are people who said, so guys, you each have enough money. Why don't you go in together? There are plenty of folks out there who have enough money to do something by themselves. But if you really want to leverage, then go in together. So if you're interested in being, you know, black or brown or whatever, and having that kind of business, you know, do what people have done before. Make a partnership, you know, pool your resources. There's your leverage. If either of them had enough money to do something really big in the entertainment industry, then they have enough money to do something big in other industries. Now, if you're looking to service people of color, we don't only just watch TV and movies. There are other ways that we contribute economically as well. So let's start.
Hey, Bev, my point precisely that as we talk about these issues across America and our community, it's not just other people's issues. Part of the conversation is so, as we said, we can compare and look at so we can begin to deal with our own. Because you're absolutely right. Why aren't some of our billionaires doing more in order to ensure that the communities, and not that Tyler Perry won't pay the tuition off for a school of African-American students, you know, and other sorts of things. But what's the strategy to strengthen our economic system when we see the disparity? On average, the average black family makes $43,000 a year. On average, the average white family makes over $70,000 a year. So there's a inequality there. We already talked about the fact that 2% only of businesses in this country are black, 10% Asian, and the rest you can guess what they are. At some point, as you said, Beverly, we have to take our own situation into our own hands with a strategy. And unfortunately, we didn't play the entirety of that tape, but that's what Minister Farrakhan was saying to the rest of that esteemed audience that he had here. If we could somehow figure out a way to work more collectively, strategically together, you know, instead of always looking for an outside government hand up, look to formulate a strategy where we're taking care of our own. But let's pivot into politics, because this is the year of the declaration, I call it, the year before the presidential primary comes up next year. Lo and behold, here we are, almost 4 years later, 3 years of Joe Biden. And Bev, I'm going to start with you. Joe Biden's performance as president since he was elected, or since he was handpicked by Jim Clyburn, which handpicked by Jim Clyburn over macaroni and cheese and fried chicken at that meeting down in South Carolina. What's your performance? What's your grade on Joe Biden's performance as president of the United States?
Now, just as I can't compare African American entrepreneurship to Asian entrepreneurship, because I'm only looking at like a single scale here, 6.0 to 10%, and I don't know what other factors we're looking at. I am not going to give Joe Biden a grade. If it were, it would be in the high AB range, because the man is doing everything he can with what he has. Now, do I agree with him on everything? Absolutely not.
What don't you agree with him on? Let's hear that.
I'm really disgusted on the immigration issue, and how he is perhaps thinking of a hold policy in the same way that Trump was. I couldn't be more disappointed.
Well, let's talk about immigration for a second, because you hit on something, because no one has been able to figure that out. I think it seems to be something that people want to stay away with. Obama just deported them. Obama was known as the deportation president. He just sent you back. People didn't know Obama sent back more people than Donald Trump talked about, so they didn't need a wall with Obama. You come over here, Obama was sending you back, and he did so in record numbers. But Joe Biden, and I got to give him credit. Donald Trump didn't really want to, he wanted to just build a wall, and, if they climbed over it, they climbed over it. What could he do? What can he do realistically about that? What do you see?
If I knew the answer to that, I would be rich and famous, and no offense,
so would he.
minutes on Black
He's
America, but
rich
I'd probably
and
be on MSNBC.
Yeah, but he is pretty rich and famous, and he can't.
One. One thing Donald Trump did was that he did deliberately create a huge backup in the immigration system. He did it deliberately, so that he essentially either held people at the border or said, you're going to wait in Mexico. And of course, if you tell people to wait in Mexico, they keep coming back over anyway. And that's one of the reasons that the immigration numbers were so high, is because the same people kept trying to come back over the border, and they just kept counting them. One thing we need to do is to be honest about how many people are trying to come over. The other thing is we need to understand, as far as I understand it, in U.S. law, you can apply for asylum at any point along the border. You do not have to go to a certain point and say, here I am at this checkpoint, 10 miles south of the border, I'm applying for asylum. You're supposed to be able to do that at any point. How we put that into better practice, I don't know. But we need to recognize that as the law and act on it. Further, once we apprehend people, we need to be able to put them in humane facilities, obviously not separate families, and increase the number of workers and judges we have so that we process people more quickly. We can't say, oh, we've got this glut of people that we can't deal with. I want to take us back to the Carter administration. Do you remember the Mariel boat lift?
I remember.
In under a year, there were hundreds of thousands of Cubans who were absorbed into the economy of Florida.
Well, now Republicans, right?
There was no wall. Okay, there were no people out with guns shooing them away. In fact, people went out in their boats and they searched for people to bring in. This was a mass, introduction effort. I hear people complaining about what's relatively a smaller number of people who want to integrate into a much larger population of people. We can do this. First of all, if you're white, you need to stop looking upon people who are brown as a threat. Folks who speak other languages are a resource. They are not a burden. And they're not a resource just when we need our lawns mowed or our gardens planted. They have the ability that everyone else here does. They speak a different language. We need to adopt them, provide what resources we can to make them as productive as they can be here. We need to do that. We need to stop frightening people in the middle of the country who have very little to do with immigrants to claim that they're taking over the U.S. economy.
Yeah, so you're saying, Bev, we should adopt the same policies we adopted when we brought the Ukrainians over here and subsidize them, ensure they get good jobs. So you're saying that it shouldn't be based on color or coming from a European type country, that Ukrainians came over here, and they seem to be treated well. Bob, what do you think, Bob? Joe Biden, should he run again or not?
Oh yeah, I think he should run again. I think he has to run again. But with respect to immigration, the problem with illegal immigration are the decisions that have been made for legal immigration. I mean, you and Bev have both talked about it. The choices that have been made, who can come in and in what numbers, affect who can't and what color they are. So those things are not unrelated. Number two, I think, and I said this over and over again, this country needs to accept this country has culpability for creating these situations in many foreign countries, which produce the anxiety and the desire on the part of those peoples to want to immigrate in the first place. But by the same token, if you have in your country political problems that need to be solved, you need to be there to solve them. The answer to your political problems in your country is not to bum rush me all the time. because the fact of the matter is, I don't have resources that are tied to or have been allocated to your presence. Not that I don't want you, not that I have anything against you, but I don't have room in my house to feed you. I don't have room in my schools I don't have enough teachers that know the language of your children to be able to communicate with them effectively. I just don't have the resources. I will help you clear up your problem in your house. I will send you some foreign aid. If you've got a corrupt government, I will try to, instead of corrupting it, I may in fact try to help you clean it up. But the answer can't be that you rush to somebody else's shores to avoid dealing with, even if it means life or death, dealing with the political situations in your own country.
Well, you make a point there. You make a very valid point there, because you look at Venezuela, where China and Russia both have presence and a relationship, politically, nuclear, etc., which is 1,700 miles away from our closest border of Florida. And then you look at the country of Ukraine, which is well over 5,000 miles. But yet, we don't look at that. So you're right. There's an issue there somewhere. But you mentioned, Bob, you said that Biden has no choice but to run, right? So there are beginning to come out with rumors of others that may be running for the Democratic nomination if Biden's health precludes him from doing so, which people aren't not concerned about. So Pete Buttigieg, who is the Secretary of Transportation, is the first, what we're hearing, backup plan to Biden. And then you've got Vice President Harris is number two. Then you've got governors on down the road, including the governor of Maryland, has been mentioned as a potential bench strength person that could run for president of the United States. What do you guys think? If Joe Biden cannot run, Bev thinks he should. Bob says he should. Bev hasn't said. Bev, what do you think about Buttigieg as the backup plan to Biden due to age or, any other unfortunate incident?
Okay, I absolutely love Pete Buttigieg. He's very intelligent. He is open-minded. He has executive experience at the mayoral level, even though it was of a rather small city. However, people in the U.S. are prejudiced. They are not going to vote for a young gay man who is married with two children. That's just not going to happen. They're not going to vote for a gay person. As for Kamala Harris, unfortunately, she was very well known and very audacious as a senator. She is much too quiet as vice president. And again, Americans are not going to vote for a woman of color. Unfortunately, in the state of racial rage in which Americans find themselves today, only a Democrat who's a white male would have a chance of winning.
So who's the default candidate?
That's not
Who's
saying
the
who I
default
favor
candidate?
or don't favor. That's just a strategic choice.
That sounds like very commonsensical approach, Bev. Who's the de facto choice? Newsom out of California. We talking about Newsom, or are we circulating Bernie Sanders' name again?
Bernie Sanders is 900 years old and he's Jewish. People are not going to vote for him. He is a democratic socialist, which is what many governments in Europe are. But because Americans don't understand that, they hear the word socialist. Plus, I mean, I think Bernie Sanders might even be older than Joe Biden, in which case we shouldn't be talking about him either.
So it sounds like California Governor Newsom, who also wasn't he recalled a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden he's a national hero?
There was a recall effort, but again, that was a very strategic move on the part of some California Republicans.
Hey, so let's switch to Republican Party. Let's talk about Donald Trump, indicted apparently coming this week with a pending potential arrest, which he is now calling on the people again to rally around him and to go out and protest. Classic example of what he's done before. Any thoughts about Donald Trump's pending indictment for issuing hush money to Stormy Daniels to quiet her from talking about the sexual exploits he had with her prior to the 2016 election? Bob, what are your thoughts about Donald Trump? Should he run again?
One thing that Donald Trump made certain by announcing the date of his indictment is that he's not going to be indicted on that day. That's the only thing that he's made. And his hold over not his base, but media, is that they keep reporting something that hadn't happened. What? You got to think about that. Why is that such a story? Even on here. Why are we concerned about something that Donald Trump says might happen next week? Who the hell is Donald Trump to you or me? The fact of the matter, that there is something that's gone unsaid here. Donald Trump's connection to the rest of the white population is much larger than his base. Is much larger than his base. His connection really is he's touched the issue of white supremacy. And I'm telling you, that's a cross-political boundary issue. That has nothing to do with whether you're Democrat or Republican. That is the core issue that everything has been founded upon. And that's what makes him so. But now, will he be indicted? Yes, he will be indicted. Can he be convicted? Yes, I believe he can be convicted. But neither of those things will solve the problem that he took the cap off. He unveiled it. He showed the naked underbelly that everybody's been kicking the can down the road for 400 years and nobody wants to deal with.
Bob, I have to disagree with you. You cannot blame Donald Trump. The day that Barack Obama was inaugurated, racist Republicans in the House and Senate decided that they were going to mistreat him, attempt to embarrass him, belittle him, cast him aside as much as they possibly could. They're the ones who wrote the permission slip for ordinary people to bring out their racism because they did it first. Donald Trump did not untap this. All he did was see the wave, he rode it. He became the figurehead on the racist boat that was frankly already set in sail by others. So yes, we can get rid of Donald Trump. And I agree with you. That's not going to be the end of the problem. But it's not that he uncapped it. He just saw the wave and like a good surfer, he got ahead of it.
Wow, that's interesting that you both say that. And then you look at a gentleman that is still behind him in the polls, in the Republican polls, Ron DeSantis, who many consider more dangerous than Donald Trump. First of all, because he's younger. Second of all, because he has a state where he's actually implemented and practiced, for instance, his woke agenda, his woke legislation, ensuring that certain curriculums of African Americans are not instituted in the state of Florida. What makes you think on a national basis it wouldn't happen? So maybe Donald Trump may be the better alternative to a Ron DeSantis. What do you think about that?
What do I want to be poisoned by more, lead or arsenic?
Oh, wow. So banking crisis, the banking crisis, we know the fallout in California. Some are predicting to a Great Depression. What's happening? It was just symbolic with the sovereign and signature bank collapse. What do you think? Are you guys up on the banking crisis in America? And is there a banking crisis, or was it just 2 or 3 or 4? And then I heard that Chase and Bank of America have loaned Susie Chayas Bank billions of dollars to keep that afloat. People are predicting that we're about to enter into a nasty banking crisis. And if you have any money, if you have over 250,000, you should be concerned. If you only have 250,000, which I'm not concerned with, right? Then, the government insures your money. Do you all see an economic crisis coming like we did back in 2007, 2006 behind the banking crisis? What do you see?
Oh, who wants to go first?
You, Bev.
I don't think we ever got rid of the banking crisis that we had in 2008 and 2009. We bailed out the big banks because they were too big to fail, we said. But, millions of people lost their homes. They're still trying to recoup. We are always going to have a crisis as long as we blame it on poor people, Black people, and stop looking at the tremendous amount of money that banks and other financial institutions make from their own speculation. We're the victims. The banks aren't the victims. They're
Wow.
the perpetrators.
They say whenever the rest of the world catches a cold, we catch the flu as a people. Bob, what do you think about that and the banking crisis?
I think Bev is right. We never recovered from the 2007 because the people who caused it are still on the loose. They've never been locked up. And many of them, in fact, I would say most of them are still running the institutions, if not bigger institutions today, which is why you see, the problem, the deregulation, the demasculation of Dodd-Frank is a tremendous asset to those who are in position enough to run the financial system of the world. You see USB Bank bailing out Credit Suisse. What is it? $3.2 billion. They're gonna. Yeah, $3.2 billion. No, the people, the scoundrels, the foxes are still in the hen house, but because they put some eggs back in the basket that are now costing us $7 and $8 a carton, we think we're okay. But the fox is still there, and they're not going anywhere.
Wow. Hey, so let me give you this pause to think. We put $2.2 trillion into this economy, $2.2 trillion during COVID, record profits for banks throughout the past few years. Where's the money? Where's the money to a point? I'm just saying, right? We put $2.2 trillion in 3 years. Where's the money? Record profits, record growth. Let's also talk about the unemployment. Record lows of unemployment. Maybe we need to put a hole in the wall and let them in. Is that the reason why our unemployment is so low and our companies are getting record profits because they're charging more? Maybe that's why our eggs are $6 a dozen. We don't have anyone to get them out the hen house, right? So when America looks at, and Bob and Bev, it has been fantastic. I got one more question for you before I let you go. When America looks at these crises and the Rite Aid CEO selling opiates in the community as a legal pharmaceutical store made $7.9 million last year, right? And the failed bank CEO in Silicon Valley made $9.2 million last. Where's the money? Where's the COVID money? $2.2 trillion. They dumped it in cannabis, right? They dumped it in cannabis, right? And what the experts are predicting, America, is to take the money out of the bank look at the Great Depression, put it under your mattresses, put it in your sock drawer, whatever. That's what we're hearing. And so it's going to be interesting. And we'll talk about our upcoming shows when we'll deal with this. But TikTok, final question for you. Should the U.S. government ban TikTok, which the United States is the heaviest user of TikTok, and begin to regulate social media to that extent? What do you guys think? Bev, you start off. What do you think about TikTok or Black TikTok? So I get up there and dance and entertain. The government's talking about banning it in the next few days. Should government be involved in that?
Well, the only social media I'm on is Facebook. The other one's TikTok, Instagram. I know nothing about. I believe that foreign companies that have inroads into, especially into the internet, should frankly all be banned from doing business in the U.S. So yes, I think TikTok should go.
Bob, your thoughts on TikTok? 6 billion users worldwide, United States heaviest users. It's claimed that the company that owns TikTok in China is using it to infiltrate secrets and information about the U.S. Should we ban TikTok?
TikTok won't educate the people. You cannot, and limiting social media. In other words, trying to control what people know by making it so that other people can't lie to them is not the same as education. The only effective remedy against TikTok, Facebook, any of the other so-called social media, infiltrating people's minds with things they don't know, is educate them so that they know the truth.
Wow.
But first, we have to teach people how to find out the truth. Because you can say a lot of things on a platform, and just because the platform is valid doesn't mean that the information is. So we need to do two things. We need to fix the platform, and we need to teach people how to do their own homework.
Hey, Bev, how about this? How about we get our own damn platforms, so that many of our social media conversations that we have even on this show, I didn't talk about a show we had 4 weeks ago, which YouTube has taken off because one of the guests mentioned something about Donald Trump's formula for early on for COVID, whatever.
Mhm.
And so we're highly regulated. Maybe we get our own platform as a people. But Bob, final thoughts from you in terms of the state of our economy. We've talked about banking. We've talked about politics. We've talked about economy. We've talked about where we are as a people. Where are we, Bob? And what do we have to do in the next 12 months before the primaries to get in shape?
Poor people, black and white, have to unite, period. The economy of this country and the world is not only acknowledges existence, but is based upon the continued existence of poverty. The only people that can change that are the people who are poor. And that's not a color issue. That's a poverty. That's a wealth and income issue.
Bev, your thoughts?
And it is absolutely a wealth and income issue. But as long as the people in leadership in America racialize poverty and convince people that this is a black issue and that it's bad, we're not going to get together the way we need to. There are folks out there who are getting fooled, and you are voting for racism over justice, and you're hurting yourself.
Wow. Bob, Bev, thank you so much for joining us on 60 Minutes in Black America. Look forward to having you both back next month as we go further, because we got stuff we didn't touch bases on, and I'm sure the people want to hear. But thank you so much. You're watching 60 Minutes in Black America. Been an outstanding show. We've been everywhere from Chris Rock. We talked about Lance Riddick, even to the TikTok deal in the U.S., U.S. banks. So much going on in our communities. Next week, the 26th, we will celebrate Black History Month with guest hosts, the incomparable Kathy Cat Evans has 3 millennial guests coming on to talk about the state of Black women in these United States. And on April 2nd, we'll talk about banking and crypto. It's been suggested that instead of investing in banks, that we look at crypto with Jamie Miner. Jamie Miner will be co-hosting that show with me as we talk about banking and crypto. Should our money be going into crypto versus banking? We talked about a few months ago the collapse in the crypto market, but we said that was an opportunity for us as a community to get on something at the bottom. But many of us don't understand it. I think it's time, as we look at this banking crisis, to begin to understand cryptocurrency and how it works as an investment opportunity for us. Hey, I would like to thank each of you for watching us today, watching us over the course of time. As I said, this show has become highly popular, get a lot of comments, a lot of feedback. If you watch us on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes in Black America. Thank you so much. Have a great week.